So we're going to talk about a 5-step plan for implementing your future authentication strategy and developing your strategy. So a couple of things to think about. Ultimately, the goal is improve security posture and decrease user friction for most of us in our environment as we talk about future authentication. The solution is typically implementing some type of phish-resistant risk-based authentication process, which is a lot of words to say conditional access. Considerations, you really want to think about consolidating your identity, having some kind of MFA or passwordless schema that you implement for your environment, making sure you have an inventory of your applications and all your service providers. And then once you have all that, selecting an IDP technology, whether it's on-prem or cloud, that maps into all of the other things that you've just captured. The last thing you want to do is start with a technology decision and then try to build out your identity architecture, because you're going to, once you make that technology selection, not only are you spending your budget, your limited budget that we all have, you've made that decision, you've painted yourself into a corner, you've taken some potential options off the table, and you have to live with your options. And you don't want to have to remap your architecture into the technology. You really want to think about the architecture first. And then just a strategy quote from Harvard Business Review, Michael Watkins, but paraphrasing here, you have to build that strategy that then defines the actions the organization can take based on that strategy that you've decided on.
So one thing on SaaS, and I know a lot of organizations, tribal organizations have moved or moving to the cloud, and I kind of want to give some props out to Director Easterly. As you're thinking about your SaaS providers, and I'm going to quote her. I don't want to, for the most part, but she's kind of a note for software as a service providers. Many of your customers are convinced to move their data to the cloud in part because they thought it would be more secure. Accordingly, they now expect you to take all the necessary precautions to keep their data safe. In other words, their security has now become your business and your reputation. Cloud providers should go beyond making security keys available to staff and make it complete company-wide policy. Those little keys could be the difference between a failed attack and one that exposes your customer data. And she offers a hint to SaaS customers: ask your providers if their staff can access your data without using security keys. So just as you're, going through those vendor risk, questionnaires and whatnot, kind of think about that. Like, hey, how do your employees access my data?
Right. And the other thing that I'll reference here to that is, and it goes back to that governance, or probably the boring, not fun part of our job, is you're onboarding a SaaS application like that. I completely agree. I think that's a great question to ask. Also go down to that cloud provider's website, find the link at the bottom that says legal or terms of service, and read the 80-page document. Somewhere in there, there's definitely going to be disclaimers. They may not talk specifically about the technology selections that they've made in their environment, but they're definitely going to talk about their security model and what their SLAs are, what their response times are. Out of scope for this conversation, but they're going to probably talk about who's responsible for protecting the data. We've all made the assumption in the past that the cloud provider, the SaaS application provider, is responsible for protecting our data. Many consumers have discovered that buried in the document somewhere, there's a disclaimer that you are responsible for backing up the data that you're putting into the SaaS application. So just things to think about. All right, step one in this 5-step plan. The reality is identity strategy is not, for years we've been looking at this is an IT problem, or it's a security problem. Just throw this at the engineer responsible for Active Directory in your environment, or maybe you have a cloud engineer in your organization. And for years we have kind of thrown this giant problem at that engineer and said, here, go solve this, go figure this out for the organization. And the reality is, this is a massive project. If you're trying to reinvent your identity strategy for your organization, um, it's significant. It's a digital transformation project to incorporate all of your legacy applications, all those line of business applications, all the legacy processes that you've implemented, and modernize and take your organization to a modern identity strategy. And the key is, yes, it is a giant elephant, but eat the elephant one bite at a time. You don't have to do it all in one fell swoop, and treat it as a digital transformation project. Kind of two, again, referencing back to what I just stated, you need to build a team. This is not, this is way too complex for a single identity engineer or the Active Directory administrator to tackle. Not only that, the team that's tackling this project needs to be a multi-domain, cross-functional team. You need to pull in members from other parts of the organization. By the way, a little hint, this is also how you solve some of the user friction problems. This is where if you get buy-in from the various parts of the organization on this user friction, this is where you can tackle that and make those decisions together as a team. Anything to?
No.
Okay.
Said it well.
Step 3, define the identity architecture for your organization. And there's a lot of considerations to think about. Notice we're at step 3. I still haven't said go out and procure an identity technology. It's very critical to do this first. And this, we don't need to talk through all of these, but just things to think about. Some of this is those use cases and personas we were talking about, the service account, the authentication methods. So if you know if you have an inventory of all the applications that you have in your environment, what are the authentication methods? You have to find some kind of least common denominator amongst all those commonalities so that you can build an authentication strategy for those services and applications.
I'm thinking auditing in insofar as, do you still need this application? Is it still being used? Is it still being updated? Or is it discoverable by threat actors? Does it become, another attack vector?
Right. And then, a challenge that we probably all run into in this organization, even deciding how let's take MFA, you're going to use an authenticator app. Well, are you providing a mobile device to run the authenticator app to all users in your organization? Are you asking them to use their personal devices? What's the policies around that? What if your user refuses to use their personal device to run your corporate authenticator app? Are you providing a token? And as you start asking these questions, you can see how complex this gets really fast, just with that one question. I've talked to many organizations that they kind of do a tiered approach. For users that have corporate mobile devices, they use the Authenticator app. Then as it scales down to users that don't have a corporate device, for example, they provide options. So the user can choose to install an Authenticator app on their personal device, or the organization can pay for like a hardware token that the user uses, or some kind of smart card or something like that. But as you create those scenarios, you end up creating multiple options that your identity strategy then has to support. Your help desk and everyone else responsible for onboarding and offboarding applications has to be trained on all of those different methods and processes. And you also have to be prepared to replace lost devices and tokens and things like that. So just that one question creates like 20 more questions that you have to think through. And the reality is the answer to almost every one of those questions usually has some dollar sign attached to it as well. Reauthentication period is another one that's really important. This goes back to knowing the persona and potentially assigning different reauthentication periods to those different personas. And to be clear, when we talk about reauthentication period, what we're talking about is how often are you going to force a user to reauthenticate and go through that MFA? This is that user friction question. So are you going to force MFA at every authentication prompt? I mean, I know just firing up my laptop, and opening my email and maybe my Teams chat and my collaboration tools and even signing into Word. I mean, just firing up my laptop for the first time in the day, I mean, there's easily 15 to 20 authentication prompts right there in that moment. Am I going to enforce MFA prompt at every single one of those? And then throughout the day, am I going to enforce MFA reauthentication? Or if they authenticate with MFA, am I not going to force an MFA reauthentication prompt for if it's that user from that device? Maybe I don't force them to reauthenticate with MFA for 24 hours, or maybe it's 14 days. That's not a question that Jen or I can answer for your organization. That's something you have to decide based on your risk model in your organization. And it's probably not the same for all users. Again, going back to what is that user persona? What do they have access to? How risky is that user? Do you have a user? And you may also want to think about users reauthenticating or users that are high risk users in the environment that tend to maybe be problem children that you see within your help desk and your tickets. You may want to think about having maybe a persona assigned to that group of users as well. So step 4, map your plan out with success milestones. For any of you that have worked through a digital transformation project overall, you do really want to think about, I like to think about early wins. So if I'm embarking and creating a great big global strategy for my identity and it's a digital transformation project and I pulled a bunch of members in from the team, from various teams, I want some quick wins for my team and for the project that we're building. I don't want to invest 6 months of time, even without making a technology decision, just pulling all the people in and spending time on this. It's an expensive proposition, and you want to look for high value, low risk wins. The flip side of this is identity done wrong can be a resume generating event, which is why the identity architecture is so critical, because it's real easy with identity to, kind of the worst case scenarios, the horror stories are you can lock your organization out of core applications. So you really want to think through this in that previous step in that identity architecture, and then build a plan with milestones that deliver high value to the organization that have low risk. And you can tackle some of those higher risk items further down in the project plan after you've established some success within your organization. So lastly, step 5, execute the plan. You've identified the architecture, you've built your team, you've built your success plan with your milestones, then go execute it. And I think a key here is not just go execute the plan, steps 1 through 10, or however many steps there are. Do step 1 and build in a feedback loop into your process such that you understand the success and then any pain points maybe that you've created through that implementation and the execution of step 1. Make sure you have a path to stakeholders and executives in your organization such that you can get feedback based on those milestones that you've achieved, so you can pivot and modify your plan as needed as you implement this transformation project.